forest was silent at night. Only the sound of the cold wind moved between the tall alien trees. A small campfire burned low, its light barely strong enough to keep away the darkness. The human man sat close to the flames, pulling his old blanket tighter around his shoulders. It was the only thing keeping him warm in this strange world. He was alone, or at least he thought so. His eyes grew heavy, the fire cracked softly, and the stars above shimmered with a pale blue glow. He had been living here for many weeks, struggling to survive in a land that was not made for him. The food was strange, the nights too long, and the silence sometimes felt alive. Still, he had learned to trust the forest, to stay quiet, and to sleep with one ear open. That night felt colder than usual. The man wrapped himself tighter and closed his eyes, but just as he drifted towards sleep, something moved. It was soft, like the pull of a gentle hand. His blanket slid slightly down his arm. He frowned, half awake, and pulled it back. The fire flickered. A shadow passed. Then again, the tug, stronger this time. The blanket slipped further, dragging toward the ground. His eyes shot open, and his hand grabbed the edge. Someone, or something, was trying to take it. He held it firmly, his breath frozen in his throat. From the darkness came a tiny rustling sound. Leaves moved, small feet stepped back quickly. He jumped up, heart racing, staring into the forest. The blanket was still in his hand, but half of it had already disappeared into the shadows. For a long moment there was silence. The man bent low, tossing a stick into the dark. The forest answered with stillness. Then, faintly, he saw them. Two small shapes, no taller than his chest. Their eyes glowed faintly like silver coins in the firelight. They clutched the stolen part of the blanket as if it was treasure. The man stepped closer. But they hissed softly, like cornered animals. The firelight touched their skin. It was smooth, pale, and almost shining. Their hair was dark and tangled, their clothes torn like they had been running for many days. He realized, with shock, they were not animals at all. They were children, or something close to it. But they were not human. They were alien, small and strange. Yet their faces carried emotions he could understand. Fear, hunger, and a desperate need to hold on to what little they had taken. The man raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. Yet the sisters only held tighter to the blanket. Their voices were high and sharp, speaking words he could not understand. Then one of them pointed a tiny finger at him and said one clear word. Ours. The fire crackled louder. The man froze. Something inside him stirred. Fear, confusion, curiosity. Why had they come to him? Why had they taken from him? And why did that single word feel less like theft and more like a claim? The sisters stepped back into the dark, still holding the blanket, but their glowing eyes never left him. The man felt the cold night press against his skin. The fire was dying, the forest too quiet. And for the first time since he had landed on this world, he realized he was no longer alone. The man stood in silence, staring into the shadows where the tiny alien sisters hid. The fire behind him flickered weakly, casting long and broken shapes across the ground. He could still see their glowing eyes, two faint orbs watching his every move. They clung to the blanket as if it was their lifeline, trembling but unwilling to let go. The night air grew colder, his breath turning to mist. He knew if he let them vanish, he might never see them again. Slowly, he took a step forward, careful not to startle them. The leaves crunched lightly under his boots, and the sound made the sisters hiss again. Their small bodies crouched low, ready to flee like frightened animals, yet something in their eyes stopped them from running. It was not just fear, it was need, desperate and sharp. The man raised his hands higher, showing he carried no weapon. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered, his voice low and steady. Of course, he knew they could not understand his words, but tone mattered, and his tone was gentle. The sisters exchanged quick glances, their thin fingers clutching tighter at the blanket. Then, to his surprise, one of them stepped out of the shadows. She was no taller than his waist, her hair tangled, her face smeared with dirt. Her silver eyes shone with both defiance and fear. She pointed at him again and spoke in broken words. "You, ours." The second sister nodded sharply, repeating the same word. Ours. The man frowned, confused and unsettled. They were small, fragile, and clearly lost. Yet the way they spoke carried weight, like an order or a law. He crouched slowly, trying to make himself less threatening. The first sister tilted her head as if measuring him. Then she tugged the blanket, pulling him closer with surprising strength. He let the blanket slip from his hands and watched as they wrapped themselves inside it. The fire's warmth faded without at the cover, but he didn't move. Instead, he studied them carefully, their strange features clearer now. Their ears were sharp, their skin pale and glowing faintly under the moonlight. Their small hands trembled as they pulled the blanket tighter around their shoulders. It was not just theft, it was survival. The man sighed, frustration mixing with pity. "You can keep it," he murmured softly. His words meant little to them, but his tone carried surrender. The sisters blinked, confused at first. Then their faces softened. The younger one made a small sound, half a laugh, half a cry. She pressed the blanket against her cheek, as if it was more than just cloth. The man leaned back, feeling the bite of the cold. He knew he could not last long without his only warmth. Still, leaving them to freeze felt impossible. Something about their eyes, their tiny, desperate hands, reminded him of children back home. He rubbed his arms, watching them carefully. The sisters whispered to each other in their alien tongue. Then, almost shyly, the elder sister shuffled forward and placed her small hand on his knee. The man stiffened, unsure of what it meant, but her silver eyes stared into his, unblinking. Her voice was quiet, but her word clear. "Ours." The forest seemed to hold its breath. The fire hissed softly, sparks floating into the cold air. He realized then that this was no simple theft. The sisters had not just taken his blanket, they had taken him. By their strange culture, by whatever rules their people followed, he now belonged to them. The man sat frozen, heart pounding. What did this mean for him? Was he their prisoner, their guardian, or something else entirely? The sisters stood close now, no longer afraid, the blanket wrapped around them like a shield, their glowing eyes never leaving his. In that quiet alien night, one truth settled into his mind. His life had just ended, and he had no choice in the matter. The man sat near the fading fire, still trying to understand what had just happened. The two tiny alien sisters were wrapped in his blanket, their silver eyes glowing in the night. They whispered to each other in soft voices, their words quick and sharp. He could not understand the language, but he could feel the weight of their tone. Every time their gaze returned to him, one word came again and again. "Ours." He rubbed his cold arms, his breath fogging in the freezing air. He wanted to pull the blanket back, but something deep in his instincts warned him not to. The sisters were not joking. They were not just thieves. The way they spoke felt like a law, an ancient tradition, and somehow he had been pulled into it. The elder sister finally stood, still clutching part of the blanket around her shoulders. She walked slowly to him, her bare feet silent on the ground. Her small hand touched his chest right over his heart. The man froze, feeling the surprising warmth of her touch. She spoke again, clearer this time. "Ours, you," the younger sister echoed softly, her voice trembling. "Ours." He tried to laugh, though his voice cracked in the cold. "Yours? I'm not a thing to keep." The sisters tilted their heads, unblinking, as if his protest meant nothing. They pressed their hands together, then touched their foreheads in a strange gesture. The elder sister pointed at him, then at the sky. Her words were broken, but they carried strange weight. "Taken, night, forever, ours." The man's heart thudded in his chest. What did they mean, forever? This was no simple game of children. He had heard enough alien customs in the past to know that rituals carried danger. If their people believed in this claim, then his fate might already be sealed. The sisters moved closer, their eyes serious. They circled him like priests around a sacred fire. The elder touched his arm. The younger touched his forehead. They whispered words in their strange language, then ended with the same one, "Ours." The man shivered, though not from the cold. It felt like chains wrapping around him, invisible but real. Was this some form of marriage, ownership, or protection? He did not know, and fear pressed at his chest. But when he looked at the sisters, their thin bodies wrapped in the blanket, their faces pale from hunger and exhaustion, he also saw something else: trust, hope, and a plea for safety. He sighed, lowering his head. "Fine, I'll stay for now," he muttered softly. Even if they didn't understand his words, they seemed to understand his acceptance. The sisters' tense shoulders relaxed, and for the first time they smiled. The younger one even laughed, a high soft sound that echoed strangely in the forest. The elder placed her small hand on his shoulder, almost like a seal. Their ritual was complete, at least for tonight, but the man knew things were about to get harder. If their people discovered this ritual, what would they do? Would they see him as a protector or as a thief who had stolen what was theirs? The forest rustled with distant sounds, reminding him that he was not safe. The fire was dying, and he was now tied to something far bigger than himself. He looked at the sisters one last time as they huddled together under the blanket, their glowing eyes soft with relief. He realized then that the cold night was no longer his greatest danger. The claim was, and whatever it meant, he would soon find out. The morning sun broke through the trees, spilling pale light across the forest floor. The man stirred from his uneasy sleep, his body stiff from the cold. The campfire had turned to ash, and the blanket was still wrapped tightly around the two tiny alien sisters. They were curled together like fragile birds, their silver eyes closed, their breaths shallow. For a moment, he almost thought they were human children, until their glowing skin caught the light. He rubbed his tired face and sighed. "What have I gotten myself into?" he muttered under his breath. As if hearing him, the elder sister opened her eyes. She sat up slowly, her dark, tangled hair falling across her shoulders. Her gaze was sharp, more mature than her small size suggested. She looked at him as though he was already bound to her. "Ours," she whispered again, her voice soft but steady. The younger sister stretched and echoed the same word, a faint smile on her lips. The man frowned, frustration mixing with curiosity. "Enough with that word. What does it even mean?" he said. The sisters tilted their heads, not understanding all his words, but catching the tone. The elder stood, pulling the blanket around her like a robe. She pointed at him, then at herself and her sister. She struggled with words, but slowly forced them out in broken English. "Rule, night claim, you with us, no break." The man blinked in disbelief. "Rule, claim, no break?" He repeated her words as if tasting them. She nodded firmly, stamping her small foot on the ground, her voice sharpened. "No break, you ours, forever." The younger sister giggled softly, but her giggle carried truth, not play. The man rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the weight of their words. Was this a tradition among their people, a law of the forest? He remembered hearing stories in alien markets about strange customs, that if you touched food first, it was yours, that if you slept under a roof, you belonged to the owner. Maybe this was the same, but worse. They had stolen his blanket, and by their strange rules, they had stolen him. He shook his head, trying to reason with them. "Look, I can help you, but I don't belong to anyone," he said firmly. The elder only narrowed her glowing eyes and tapped her chest. She repeated slowly, as if teaching a stubborn child. "You belong, you ours, no choice." The words hit him like a chain snapping shut. He stared at them, his heart pounding with unease. The sisters looked so small, so weak, yet the confidence in their voices carried the weight of an ancient law. Maybe they were not old enough to make it up. Maybe they were simply repeating the truths they had been taught since birth. The man stood and paced the small clearing. He needed to think. Leaving them was an option, but something inside told him it was dangerous, not only for them but for him. If their people followed this rule, then breaking it might bring punishment. What kind of punishment he didn't know, and that made it worse. The sisters watched him closely, their eyes tracking his every move. When he stopped, they stood side by side, holding the blanket like a banner. The elder raised her chin proudly and said again, "Rule, keep us safe. Rule bind you. No break." The younger nodded eagerly, her small hands clutching tighter. The man felt trapped, caught in a net he hadn't seen until it closed around him. The forest rustled, and a cold shiver ran down his back. Somewhere out there, he knew, others of their kind must be searching. If the sisters were following these strange rules, their enemies would know them too. And if he had truly been claimed, then those enemies would see him as part of the sisters now. That thought chilled him more than the cold night ever could. The man finally sank to the ground, his voice heavy with resignation. "Strange rules," he muttered. The sisters smiled as if pleased and sat down close to him. Their ritual had worked, their law was binding. The forest was no longer calm. From the moment the sisters explained their strange rule, the man felt uneasy. Something in the air had changed, a tension, like the woods were holding their breath. The sisters stayed close, their tiny hands clinging to the blanket as if it was a shield. Their silver eyes kept darting toward the trees, listening to sounds he could not hear. The man crouched low, scanning the forest. For days he had learned to listen for danger. Animals, storms, shifting ground. But this sound was different. It was faint, rhythmic, steady. Footsteps. The elder sister hissed softly, her body stiff. The younger one pressed her face into the blanket, whispering words in her alien tongue. The man frowned, his chest tightening. "Who is it?" he muttered, though he knew they wouldn't answer in English. Still, the elder sister looked up at him and gave a single word he could understand. "Hunters." His blood ran cold. He didn't know what these hunters were, but the fear in her voice told him enough. They were dangerous, and they were close. The man grabbed a branch from the fire pit, its end still glowing with embers. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The forest grew darker as the clouds swallowed the morning sun. Leaves rustled, branches snapped softly, shadows moved between the trees, tall and sharp. The man could now see them, figures bigger than him, moving with purpose. Their armor glinted faintly, their weapons long and curved. Alien voices carried through the woods, low and guttural. They were searching, hunting, closing in. The sisters pressed against his legs, trembling. The elder clutched his arm and whispered fiercely, "Hide, hide!" She pointed toward a thick cluster of roots at the base of a giant tree. Without thinking, the man guided them down, helping them crawl into the hollow space. The younger one whimpered, but he placed a fin. Cure on his lips. "Quiet," he breathed, his heart pounding. He crouched in front of the hollow, his body blocking the entrance. The hunters' voices grew louder, their steps heavier. He pressed his back to the tree, gripping the burning branch tighter. His eyes darted between the shadows, waiting for them to appear. Then he saw one. A tall alien figure stepped into the clearing, its skin dark like stone, its eyes glowing red. It held a jagged spear in one hand and sniffed the air like a predator. The man's chest froze. The hunter's gaze swept the clearing, then lingered on the dying fire. It tilted its head, growling something to the others. Two more hunters emerged, circling the area like wolves. The man's pulse raced. If they looked too closely, they would see the sisters hidden behind him. If they caught sight of him protecting them, there would be no turning back. He forced himself to stay calm, though sweat ran down his back. The embers on his branch hissed, a faint glow betraying his presence. One of the hunters stepped closer, sniffing again. The man held his breath, his grip tightening. The alien's red eyes narrowed, its spear lifting slightly. For a moment, time froze. The only sound was the faint tremble of the younger sister trying not to cry. Then, a branch cracked in the distance. The hunters jerked their heads toward the sound, growling. With sharp movements, they turned and stalked away into the forest, chasing the noise. The man exhaled shakily, his knees weak. He glanced back at the hollow where the sisters hid, their glowing eyes wide with fear. "They're looking for you," he whispered. The elder sister nodded slowly, her lips trembling as she repeated the word. "Hunters." The man helped them out of the hollow, but his mind was heavy. These hunters weren't just passing by, they were tracking the sisters step by step. And now, by hiding them, he had placed himself in their path. He looked at the frightened sisters clinging to him. The strange ritual, the rules, the claim, it all made sense now. The forest grew silent again after the hunters left. The man's grip on the burning branch loosened, his breath heavy in his chest. The tiny sisters crawled out from the hollow roots, their blanket trailing behind them. Their eyes were wide and glowing, still filled with fear. They looked fragile in the dim light, like two small candles flickering in a storm. The man crouched down and studied them. "Why are they after you?" he asked softly, though he knew they would struggle with his words. The elder sister frowned, her lips pressed tight. Then she touched her chest and pointed at her younger sibling. Her voice cracked as she spoke slowly. "Us. Hunted." The man tilted his head. "Yes, hunted, but why?" he pressed. The younger sister hugged the blanket closer, her small voice trembling. "Because who we are." He stared at them, confused. "You're just children," he muttered. But the elder sister shook her head quickly, her silver eyes sharp with meaning. She stepped closer and touched her forehead with two fingers, then pressed those fingers to his chest. Her voice carried weight even though her words were broken. Not just children, blood of crown. The man froze, the words sinking in slowly. Crown, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The sisters exchanged a glance, their faces pale. The elder sister nodded, her voice more steady now. Yes, crown, last. The fire in his chest turned to ice. They were not just frightened runaways, not just orphans wandering in the cold forest. They were royal blood, fugitives of a fallen clan, and if hunters were chasing them, it was not to return them home. It was to end them, to erase the last of their line. The younger sister's eyes filled with tears as she whispered in a trembling voice. They want us. Gone. Forever. She buried her face in the blanket, her small shoulders shaking. The elder sister placed a protective arm around her and glared at the man. Her expression said more than her broken words ever could. She was daring him to judge them, daring him to walk away. The man rubbed his forehead, his thoughts racing. He had stumbled into something far greater than himself. Surviving the forest was hard enough, but now he carried the burden of 2 hunted children of royalty. He wanted to tell them he couldn't help, that he wasn't strong enough. But when he looked at their faces, small, tired, and desperate, the words died in his throat. The elder sister moved closer, her silver eyes locking on his. Her small hand gripped his wrist with surprising strength. You stay, protect, she said firmly. The younger one whispered the same, softer, protect. The man swallowed hard. Their ritual, their rules, their strange claim, it all connected now. By taking his blanket, by declaring him theirs, they had pulled him into their ancient law, a law that bound him as their protector, whether he wanted it or not. Breaking that law might not just betray them, it might bring down the full wrath of their people upon him. He sat down heavily, staring at the fading light through the trees. The hunters would not stop. They would come again and again. And now, if he walked away, he would be leaving 2 children to certain death. But if he stayed, he would be standing against forces far larger than himself. His jaw tightened, his decision made without words. He looked at the sisters, huddled close together under the blanket. Fine, he muttered, his voice low but steady. I'll protect you. The sisters blinked, then their eyes softened. The younger one gave a small smile, the first he had seen from her. The elder sister nodded firmly, sealing the vow. Ours, she whispered again, but this time the word carried relief, not command. The man leaned back against the tree, exhaustion pressing on him. Knew the nights ahead would be long, the dangers endless, but for the first time since he had arrived in this alien world, he was no longer just surviving. He had a purpose, a duty, a bond. The man did not sleep that night. Every snap of a branch, every whisper of wind in the trees made him tighten his grip on the burning stick he kept close. The sisters huddled under the blanket, their silver eyes half closed, but even in their exhaustion they twitched at the faintest sound. They knew the hunters would return, and they did not have long. At dawn, the forest grew heavy with fog. It clung to the ground and rolled through the trees like a white river. The man stood and kicked dirt over the fire, hiding all signs of their camp. Come on, he whispered, though his voice was tired. The sisters obeyed without question, their small hands gripping the edge of his coat as they followed him. The forest was not kind. The ground was uneven, covered in roots that twisted like snakes. Strange vines dripped from the branches, glowing faintly in the mist. The man kept his eyes sharp, knowing this world held dangers beyond hunters. He had seen plants that swallowed birds whole. He had heard beasts roar in the distance. Now, carrying the burden of 2 fragile sisters, every step felt heavier. The younger one stumbled, letting out a small cry. The man lifted her without a word, her tiny weight pressing against his chest. She clung to him tightly, her small fingers digging into his shirt. The elder walked close at his side, her sharp eyes scanning the fog with an intensity that surprised him. For someone so small, she carried herself like a leader. Hours passed. Their breaths grew heavy, their steps slower, but the forest refused to give them rest. From far behind, the low guttural calls of hunters echoed through the fog. The man's stomach clenched. They're close, he muttered. The elder nodded, her voice tight. Run. They broke into a desperate pace, weaving through the thick trees. The man carried the younger sister, while the elder darted ahead, guiding them through. paths only she seemed to know. The fog blurred everything, but the sounds of pursuit grew sharper. Branches cracked, guttural voices barked, weapons clanged against armor. The hunters were gaining. The man's legs burned, but he pushed harder. He could feel the younger sister's rapid heartbeat against his chest, her breaths quick and shallow. The elder suddenly raised her hand, signaling him to stop. She pointed to the ground ahead. Sharp, jagged roots formed a hidden pit between the trees. Without her warning, he would have fallen. He nodded in silent thanks, and they slipped around it. But the hunters were not blind. A shadow passed behind them, tall and menacing in the fog. The man's blood turned cold. He pressed the sisters behind a wide tree trunk, covering them with his body. The hunters stalked past, their glowing red eyes scanning the mist. One of them paused, sniffing the air like a beast. The man held his breath, praying they could not hear the pounding in his chest. After long seconds, the hunters moved on, disappearing deeper into the fog. The man exhaled sharply, his knees weak. The elder sister grabbed his hand and tugged, whispering fiercely, "Not safe, move." They pressed onward, deeper into the forest. The fog thinned slowly, revealing massive trees with roots that twisted into natural tunnels. The elder guided them through, choosing paths too small for the larger hunters to follow. Still, every step felt borrowed, every breath a gift. The man knew they could not keep running forever. Finally, when the sun dipped low, the sisters stopped. They pointed toward a dark hill rising between the trees. At its base stood a broken stone arch, half buried in vines and moss. The elder's voice trembled with both fear and hope. "Shrine," she whispered. Her silver eyes met his. "Safe, maybe." The man stared at the ancient structure, unease crawling up his spine. It looked old, older than the forest itself. Carved symbols glowed faintly on the stones, their light flickering like dying stars. Whatever lay inside was no simple shelter. But the sisters seemed certain, and they had no other choice. He tightened his grip on the younger sister, took the elder's hand, and together they stepped toward the shrine. Behind them, far in the fog, the hunters' calls rose again, sharper, closer, relentless. The forest would not let them go so easily. The broken stone arch loomed before them, half swallowed by roots and vines. The man stopped at the base of the hill, his breath heavy, the younger sister still clinging to his chest. The elder sister stood beside him, her silver eyes glowing faintly as if they recognized the place. She touched the cracked stones with trembling hands, whispering words in her alien tongue. The sound was soft, like a prayer carried on the wind. The man shifted uneasily. "This is it," he muttered, though he didn't know if it was safety or another trap. The stones pulsed faintly, glowing with symbols he had never seen before. They curved and spiraled, alive with a light that seemed older than the forest itself. The sisters stepped forward with surprising confidence, pulling him along. Inside, the air was colder. The walls were carved from smooth black stone, each mark glowing faint blue. The silence felt heavy, pressing against his ears. Every sound of their footsteps echoed through the chamber. The younger sister shivered, but her eyes were wide, filled with awe rather than fear. The elder sister placed the blanket on the floor before a cracked pedestal. She knelt and touched the stone, her voice steady. "Home of Crown," she whispered in broken words. The man frowned, looking at the glowing walls. "Your ancestors," he guessed softly. She nodded, her face serious. The chamber seemed alive now. The symbols glowed brighter, reacting to their presence. A faint hum filled the air, deep and ancient. The man's chest tightened as he realized this place had been waiting. Not for him, but Fu. Or them. The elder sister stood and walked around the pedestal, tracing the symbols with her small fingers. She spoke slowly, carefully, as if translating words that were not hers. Rule of claim, rule of bond, protector chosen. The man froze, his heart skipping. Protector, chosen. The ritual of the blanket had not been random. It was part of something greater, something written in the stones. The younger sister pressed close to him, whispering softly, "You ours. You protector." Her small hand clutched his shirt as if sealing the truth. The man swallowed hard, his throat dry. "So this is what it means," he muttered. Not only had they claimed him by some alien tradition, the shrine itself confirmed it. Suddenly the chamber trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. The glowing symbols pulsed faster. The elder cried out, pulling him toward the center of the room. A beam of pale light shot down from the cracked ceiling, bathing them in its glow. The man shielded his eyes, his heart pounding. When the light dimmed, a faint mark glowed on the back of his hand. He stared in shock, rubbing at it, but the symbol remained, etched into his skin. The sisters gasped, their voices rising in awe. "Protector, protector," they whispered again and again. The man felt the weight of it, heavier than any chain. Then, from outside the shrine, came a sound that froze his blood. The guttural calls of hunters, closer than ever. Their footsteps pounded on the ground, their weapons clashing. The shrine's hum grew louder as if sensing the danger. The sisters pressed against him, their eyes wide with fear. The elder whispered sharply, "Fight, or I'll end." The man clenched his fists, staring at the glowing mark on his hand. He was no longer just a lost human struggling to survive. The forest had given him a role he never wanted, protector of two royal sisters, hunted by their enemies, bound by canvas. I rules older than memory. He looked toward the entrance, the shadows of hunters already gathering outside, and he knew there would be no turning back. The shrine had chosen, and so had he. The ground shook beneath their feet. The hunters had arrived, their footsteps heavy like falling stones. From the entrance of the shrine, shadows moved, tall and armed. The man stood in the center of the chamber, both sisters behind him. His hand still glowed with the strange mark, the sign of protector. The sisters clung to him, their eyes filled with fear. But this time, they did not say run. They said nothing, because they knew there was nowhere left to go. The man looked down at the stick in his hand. It was just a branch, burnt at one end, weak against metal and armor, but he gripped it tightly, his eyes fixed on the glowing doorway. The shrine had chosen him, and now it asked him to fight. The hunters stepped into view, 6 of them. Their armor gleamed under the pale light, their eyes burning red. One of them stepped forward and pointed a long blade at him. The voice that followed was rough and cold. "Give them and live." The man did not flinch. He spread his arms in front of the sisters, his voice steady, though his heart thundered. "No," the lead hunter snarled. "Human, not yours. You not one of us." But the sisters stepped forward, their voices strong despite their size. "He is ours," they said in unison. The shrine's walls pulsed brighter as if echoing their words. The hunters hesitated. The rules of the claim were ancient. Even they could not ignore them easily. But then the leader growled, "Rules break when weak lead." He raised his weapon. "We end all." The man braced himself. The hunters rushed forward with blades drawn. The first strike came fast, and he dodged barely in time. He swung his stick with all his strength, striking one across the helmet. The alien stumbled, but did not fall. Another charged him from the side. He rolled, grabbing a loose stone from the floor. He hurled it into the second hunter's face, buying a second more. Pain shot through his side as a blade grazed him, but he did not fall. The sisters screamed behind him, their voices high with fear. The shrine glowed brighter and brighter, the floor rumbling under their feet. Suddenly, light burst from the pedestal. It struck the hunters like a wave, knocking them back. The man turned in shock. The pedestal had cracked open, revealing an ancient staff inside. Without thinking, he grabbed it. The moment his hand touched it, the glow on his skin flared. The staff pulsed with power, alive in his grip. The hunters froze for a heartbeat, confused, afraid. Then he struck. The staff moved as if guided by instinct, its energy flaring with each swing. One hunter fell, another screamed as light burst across their chest. The man pushed forward, forcing them back step by step. He didn't know how long he could last, but for the first time, they feared him. The leader roared and charged. The man blocked the strike with the staff, sparks flying. Then with all his strength, he drove the staff into the hunter's chest. A flash of light exploded through the chamber. The leader fell, still and silent. The others hesitated, then fled into the trees. The shrine grew quiet again, the glow fading to soft light. The man dropped to his knees, breathing hard. His arms burned, his side bled. But the sisters ran to him, throwing their arms around his shoulders. They were safe. He looked at them, tired, but alive. "You're safe now," he whispered. The elder touched his cheek, her voice trembling. "Protector." Outside, the forest was still. But inside something had changed forever. He was no longer just a lost human. He had stood, he had fought, and he had won, and now he truly belonged. The forest stood still after the battle. The mist had cleared, the wind had calmed. The man sat on the cold stone floor of the shrine, his body aching, the glowing staff resting beside him. The sisters were curled up against his side, their breaths finally calm. He looked down at them, and for the first time since his crash on this alien world, he didn't feel lost. The shrine walls pulsed gently, not with warning now, but with warmth, like the place had accepted him, welcomed him. He glanced at the glowing mark on his hand, the symbol still clear and alive. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was part of something old, something sacred. The elder sister stirred and looked up at him. Her voice was soft, but full of quiet strength. "You protect us forever." He gave a tired smile. "I will," he said. "I promise." Outside, birds returned to the trees, their strange calls echoing between the leaves. The forest, once filled with fear, now seemed peaceful. But the man knew it wouldn't last forever. The hunters would come again, maybe stronger. Others would learn the sisters were still alive. And this world, it wasn't kind to the weak. But he also knew something else. He wasn't weak anymore. He had fought, he had bled, and he had protected. The mark on his hand wasn't just a symbol. It was a bond, and it had changed him. The younger sister yawned, then gently placed her tiny hand on his chest. Her eyes were sleepy, but her voice clear. "You family now." His heart tightened at those words, more powerful than any weapon, family. He had lost everything before, but now, somehow, he had found something more. They spent the day inside the shrine. The sisters showed him the hidden parts, tunnels beneath the stones, carvings of their ancestors, ancient markings of their lost clan. There were food roots stored in sealed stone jars, and glowing water that healed wounds slowly. It had been a royal place once, now forgotten by the world outside, but with their return, it lived again. By nightfall, the man had lit a small fire at the entrance. He sat in silence, the staff beside him, watching the stars through the trees. The sisters slept peacefully inside, safe, wrapped in the very blanket that had started it all. He chuckled softly, remembering that first night. Who would have thought losing a blanket would lead to gaining a family? A soft breeze passed through the trees. It carried whispers of danger far away, but also the promise of tomorrow. The man looked up at the sky, at a moon that was not Earth's, and for the first time, he didn't wish to go back. He belonged here now, not because of the ritual, not because of the glowing mark, but because he had chosen to stay. He had chosen to protect, to fight, to care, and they had chosen him too, not for strength, not for power, but for heart, for loyalty, for kindness. In a world that didn't want him, he had found the only two souls who did, and that was enough. The fire crackled gently as he leaned back against the stone wall, eyes watching the shadows, ears listening for danger. His body tired, but his heart full. The protector had been chosen, and he would never let them be taken again.